So the drawing project today is designed to help you create like a focal point, a center of interest. It's kind of a photography technique where you have one part in focus and the rest is blurry, working with aperture and depth of field. So we're going to kind of mimic that in a drawing project. This is a good exercise to do periodically because it forces you to think about the viewer, the person looking at your artwork. Where do you want them to look? There's a few examples to look at from other artists. Your first challenge is to find a good object. You don't want anything that's too uniform, symmetrical, or flat. You need objects that have a little bit of texture, a little bit of variety to them. Something like this toy, this Hulk car, it might be a little too flat. Like, what would be the most interesting part of this to draw attention to? Maybe a wheel, maybe the front, but it doesn't have that much of one specific area that you could draw attention to. Maybe this car has a little bit more interest to it. Maybe this part in the middle. Still maybe not the best choice, but this is one step up from the previous one. What about something like this? What if we created a center of interest with the handles and then the rest of the jump rope kind of trailed off? That could work. You have to think about how you can do it to where maybe you could see this part as your focal point and you could develop this and let the rest trail off. If you think about something like an octopus instead of a bullseye, we're going to create one area that's fully developed to catch attention and the rest is going to trail off to a sketch, an unfinished portion. So you need something that's going to be captivating, but you also need something that can trail off in an aesthetically pleasing manner, right? So in an interesting way, not just like a target. So if you think about, like a bullseye or something, if this is your center of focus and interest, you don't want it to be gradually getting less in such a uniform pattern. You want it to be more, if this is your center of interest, maybe it's trailing off in a little bit of a different way. A person is easy to think about because obviously you could do the face and the eyes and let some of the rest trail off, but we can't use people for this project. So here's one object I could potentially use. The good part about this is that I can create it, I can manipulate it into a shape, an interesting shape. And also, if I have this part trail off to unfinished, that means I don't have to do all of the detail of the legs. So maybe my focal point would be here on the head of this tripod. The idea then is, if I'm drawing this object here, I'm gonna do my comparative measurements. I'm gonna make sure I have enough room to trail off. So the center of my composition for the angle I have it at is about right here, because I'm gonna do about this, right? And then from the bottom here to the bottom here. So about right there, this like third point is my composition if I was doing that. If I'm gonna put this in the middle, I know that this part is gonna be here. Then I am gonna start with a rough sketch like we have talked about before. And this is more of the part that I'm going to develop. In photography, there's another thing called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is actually based on a mathematical formula. It goes back to Greek and Roman math. If you divide your paper into like a big tic-tac-toe grid, so you divide it into thirds vertically and thirds horizontally, wherever those lines would cross, they call them hot spots in photography, but that's considered the most pleasing area for your eye to have a focal point. So you can off-center your focal point. Don't have your focal point smack in the middle. You can put it off to whichever side you want to. This is going to be my focal point area, the head of the tripod, and this is going to actually trail off a little bit this way. Underneath here, I have another leg of the tripod coming this way. So then this is going to trail off this way, kind of end up here. And then I have one more that's kind of disappearing over here, and it's going to trail off this way. I'm going to sketch this out a little bit, and then we'll be back. So now I've figured out my focal point. So this is just the beginning stages still, but you can get an idea. I'm going to choose my focal point, and this area right here, I'm going to kind of decide how far to go, but you can see how I started. This is where I'm going to put 100% detail, 100% range of values, complete shading, finish it so that it is 100% polished and smooth. So this is going to be my most developed part of the drawing. And then I am going to, not too systematically, but a little bit, more freely, I'm going to then trail off. So this is 100% range of value, 100% detail. So now I'm going to gradually trail off to just a minimal sketch. So in this area, I can decide less value and less detail, probably around here, so that it's trailing off. It's maybe not as intense with the dark shadows. Remember, the way you make a focal point, an area of interest, is full range of values, so you have more contrast, more detail. So have less contrast, so that means not as deep shadows. You can have some shading here, and you still would want some detail because you still want this to be a definite shape. So you can see how I've started doing that. So I would just continue with less shading, and then you can see how I've gotten to be less detail. And so at the end, there's going to be no detail and no shading. It's just complete gestural sketch trailing up. So I would do the same thing, kind of here and here a little bit. So right in here is less contrast, still a decent amount of detail, and I would just continue that. That's the rough idea of how to do this project. We're working with creating a focal point and going from fully developed to minimal gesture. So one of your biggest challenges is to find a good object. Look for something that has a little bit of detail that you can shade, that you can get some contrast in. Some hard edges or a good texture will work really well, and something that you can trail off and compose to be not just very symmetrical. All right, go to it.